What's up, guys? This is going to be part two of the best flagship phones that you can find for 300 bucks. Check out part one. We talked about the OnePlus 9, the Note 10 Plus, iPhone 11, and also the S21 and the LG V60 Pixel 6 Pro. So those are my favorites, but I also want to give you guys some other alternatives as well too. All right, first off, Note 20 Ultra, still an awesome phone, even compared it to the S23 Ultra. And it's just awesome. At 350 bucks, you can pretty much find it on eBay. Now, depending on configuration, it can go up to around 400 bucks. But yeah, I've been seeing them certified refurbished on eBay, 350 solid. So this is such an awesome device. I still really love the design on here. Stainless steel frame, glass back, IP68 dust and water resistant, built-in stylus, the classic Galaxy Note boxy design. And this has a massive 6.9-inch display, dynamic AMOLED, 120 Hz HDR10 plus, and I believe the Note 20 Ultra gets up to a peak 1500 nits peak brightness, 1440p, 496 for the PPI. Absolutely love the display, beautiful boxy curved display. Only downside with the display is that you can only get the 120 Hz at full HD. So other than that, it's an awesome display. Now, this phone got its last major OS update with Android 13, One UI 5, but this phone will get security patches, security updates up to 2025, I believe. So you're going to be set for security, and then you have the Snapdragon 865 chip and then the Adreno 650 on here. It's still blazing fast, guys, and I mean really fast, especially when it comes to gaming. Check out my full gaming test. It pretty much blew through every game that I threw it at. I was able to play PUBG, Call of Duty, Fortnite at great settings. So it's still a beast when it comes to gaming. And this was the last Note phone with SD card support. So you can put an SD card in here, get a ton of storage if you take videos and download a lot of content. You'll really enjoy that. I think the base is 128 gigs and 12 gigs of RAM, but you could also go all the way up to 512, 12 gigs of RAM, and then throw an SD card in there. But yeah, the expandable storage is awesome to have. Stereo speakers are solid on this guy. You also have NFC, under the display, fingerprint sensor. All the bells and whistles are pretty much still on here that you would find in an S23 Ultra. As far as the S Pen features, Samsung wireless desktop support, pretty much all the good stuff is still on here. You also have on here a pretty good camera setup. So you have the 108 megapixel standard. It's still going to give you very highly detailed photos if you like to zoom in. You also have 12 megapixel periscope telephoto with 5x optical zoom, and then a 50 times hybrid zoom with 12 megapixel ultra wide. It can shoot in 8K24 with a 10 megapixel selfie cam that also shoots in 4K 60. If you checked out my comparison, it compares to the S23 Ultra pretty good. Even today, you still get some great shots with the Note 20 Ultra. Still really good zoom shots on here as well too. So I think the cameras have aged pretty well on here. You also have a 4500 milliamp battery, 25 watt wired charging, and 15 watt wireless charging. And there's also reverse wireless charging on here as well too. Battery life is pretty decent on the Note 20 Ultra. I'm going to do a battery drain test on this phone so I can show you guys what kind of battery you can expect if you decide to get a refurbished or a used Note 20 Ultra. But for me, battery life is fine. I typically can get around 6 hours of screen on time pretty easily with this phone. Next is the iPhone 12 mini. I really liked this phone when it first came out. I think the only downside to this phone was the battery life. But since this phone is around 300 bucks now on Amazon, you pretty much can buy a battery case and that pretty much solves that problem. Other than that, it's a very nice phone for people who want something compact and also want something that's fairly cheap. So this has an aluminum frame, IP68 dust and water resistant. Like I said, really compact for people who don't like big phones. You don't like to use two hands and stuff like that. You really like this phone. The size of it is nice and the design is still very pretty on here. You also have the Super Retina XDR OLED display on here. It gets up to 1200 nits peak brightness. It's a 5.4-inch display, 1080p, 476 for the PPI. The overall display quality is pretty good on this phone. I think most iPhone users are used to the notch. But yeah, the image quality that this display produces is very nice. It's an OLED display. It's very colorful, very bright. So I have no issues with that. And like I said, it's very easy to one-hand this display. This phone is going to be getting updates for a very long time. It's running the latest version of iOS. It has the Apple A14 chip. It's literally blazing fast. Like there's nothing that this phone can't do. Opens everything super fast, plays pretty much any game. It's a really fast phone, so you don't need to worry about that. You also have on the base 64 gigs of internal storage and 4 gigs of RAM on here as well. And then this phone also has pretty nice sounding stereo speakers, especially for the size of this phone. I was actually pretty impressed with that. And then, of course, you got your Face ID and NFC and wireless charging. So all your additional features are still pretty much here. Now, the very cool thing about the iPhone 12 mini is I thought the camera quality was still pretty great on here. It's a 12 megapixel standard, a 12 megapixel ultra wide. It shoots in 4K 60 along with a 12 megapixel selfie cam that shoots in 4K 60. You're going to get some really great, fantastic shots out of this phone, and it does a really good job at giving you pretty good detail. It does a somewhat decent job in low light as well too. Excellent video quality on here. So I think for the $300 price point, it's pretty much zero complaints with image quality. Now the battery life on this phone, like I said, it's just okay. I think like if you got it brand new, right, 100% battery health, it would only get like 4 hours, 30 minutes of screen on time. Like I said, you have wireless charging and the MagSafe charging as well, which is pretty cool. But what's awesome is that the phone is cheap, so you can buy a battery case with this phone and you'll pretty much be good to go. So I would definitely consider it. It's a very cheap alternative, and like I said, great cameras, great screen, and with the Apple A14 chip, you pretty much won't have to upgrade this phone for a very long time. Now next is the Galaxy S22. So I made several videos about this. This phone, you can find it right now, T-Mobile version like I have from Amazon for $340. And then if you do want a unlocked version of this phone, it'll cost like $370, which I think is still a pretty good deal considering that this is literally last generation's phone. So it's just an awesome phone. I just really like this phone. Just everything about it, especially for $300 I thought it was a steal, honestly. It's got an aluminum frame on here. It's IP68 dust and water resistant, and it just looks really nice still. A lot of people prefer this design on the S22. I really like it as well with the camera setup. And this phone has a beautiful display. It's 6.1 inches, dynamic AMOLED, 120 hertz HDR10 plus, gets up to 1300 nits peak brightness, 1080p 425 for the PPI, very slim bezels, and just a beautiful flat panel to look at, and absolutely love the display on here. This phone also has Android 13, and it will get updates for a very long time. You get the Snapdragon 8 Gen 1 on here. You also get just excellent performance in general with gaming and just opening everything, apps and stuff like that. Is going to be a very smooth and speedy experience. I will say that these, the 8 Gen 1 gets a little bit hot just when doing just sort of like regular stuff, man. Like with game, it's never like crashed on me or started glitching, but it's just one of those like hotter phones. Now you have 128 gigabytes of storage and 8 gigs of RAM, and you have some really great stereo speakers on here as well. They get pretty loud. I didn't have any issues with that. And under the display, fingerprint sensor is here, face unlock is here, Samsung desktop support is here. All of your flagship software features are going to be here for the most part. And this phone still, I think, has really good cameras. It's got a 50 megapixel standard and a 10 megapixel telephoto. It does 3x optical zoom with a 12 megapixel ultra wide. It also shoots in 8K 24 with a 10 megapixel selfie cam that also shoots in 4K 60. Image quality was beautiful on here. Check out my S22 versus S23 comparison. You can see the camera side by side. It's like literally extremely close. So you're getting still top tier flagship camera with this phone for around $300. It's actually pretty crazy. Now when it comes to the battery situation, the battery life is okay on this phone. It's got a 3700 milliamp battery, 25 watt wire charging. You get wireless and reverse wireless charging. Battery life is okay. On a heavier day, it sort of gets around like that 5 hour mark. And if you're a lighter user, you could kind of get 6 hours out of this phone. But like I said, battery life is just okay on this phone. This is a phone that you could kind of invest in also a battery pack if you want to. If you're a lighter user, I don't think you need to. But if you're somebody that games, does heavier stuff, I would think about it as well too. You can get them for like $30. But it's a pretty solid deal. I really like this phone. Now next is the Galaxy S20 FE. So you can find this well below $300. And honestly, I think it's like lower, almost lower than $200 if you get it locked to a carrier. But typically this phone is like super cheap, and I want to put this on the list because I really wanted to put it on the part one, but I had other phones that I liked a little bit more, but this phone is really awesome. So it's got a plastic back So, the plastic bag's not really a big deal. It still looks and feels kind of premium to me. It's an aluminum frame. It's IP68 dust and water resistant as well. And I really like the color choices that they have with this phone. You also have a 6.5-inch Super AMOLED display. It's 120 Hz HDR10 Plus. Completely flat display. It's 1080p 407 for the PPI. I think it's a beautiful display still, vibrant colors. Like I said, super smooth with the 120 Hz. Now, this phone also got its last major OS update, Android 13 One UI 5.1, and it also will get security updates for up until 2025, which is really nice. So you can get this phone, like I said, $200 easy. And it's crazy fast. Snapdragon 865 chip on here, and this phone does have micro SD card support. So if you're somebody that likes to take a lot of video, download a lot of content, you do have expandable storage on top of the internal 128 gigs and 6 gigs of RAM. So it's very awesome for that, because most phones don't give you this type of power and expandable storage for $200. Now, you also have on here stereo speakers, which are great, sound really loud. Under the display, fingerprint sensor works pretty good as well. And believe it or not, this phone still has great cameras on here. It's a 12 megapixel standard and an 8 megapixel telephoto. It has 3x optical zoom with a 12 megapixel ultra wide. It shoots in 4K 60 on the front and back. You have a 32 megapixel selfie cam. The pictures on here still look great to me, especially if you're in good lighting. I think the pictures look awesome. Even low light shots don't really look that bad on here. And I think for the price, like, I don't think anybody would complain about this, especially if you compared it to like a $200 budget phone. I think it would still beat a lot of the $200 budget phones out right now. Even honestly, probably on par with some $300 mid-rangers. All right, so the image quality, like I said, great. Battery life is actually pretty decent on here. I can easily get 6 hours out of this phone with a 4500 milliamp battery. You have 25-watt wired charging and wireless charging on top of the reverse wireless charging. So the phone is pretty stacked when it comes to features and stuff like that. So I think it's an awesome buy, and like I said, very low investment since it's so cheap. All right, so last on the list is the Galaxy S20 Ultra. Again, you can easily find this older flagship for $300. It's got the aluminum frame. It's also got IP68 dust and water resistant, dynamic AMOLED display at 6.9 inches, so it's a big phone, 1440p. 511 for the PPI, but the 120 Hz only works at the 1080p mode, just like the Note 20 Ultra. But like I said, the display is absolutely beautiful, and I love the shape of the display as well too. Again, just much easier to hold. Gets really bright at 1400 nits peak brightness, HDR10 plus, all that good stuff. So still a beautiful display to look at. And again, this phone is pretty much in the same boat, Android 13 One UI 5.1, and it does have the Snapdragon 865 chip on here. You get excellent gaming performance. I did a full gaming test. I was able to run PUBG at 90 frames and pretty much Call of Duty, Fortnite. It was all able to run at like 90 frames if I remember correctly. So the gaming experience is still awesome on this phone. And again, you have that SD card support. The base is 128 gigs and 12 gigs of RAM. Stereo speakers sound great, and you have all of your additional features that you want. Under the display, fingerprint sensor, very fast. Face unlock is on here. Samsung desktop support is on here as well. And the cameras on the S20 Ultra are pretty good as well too. We got a 108 megapixel standard with a 48 megapixel periscope telephoto lens. That's 4x optical zoom with a 10 times hybrid zoom, a 12 megapixel ultra wide with a 0.3 depth sensor, and this does also the 100 times zoom as well too. It's got the 8K 24 frames per second on here, and a 40 megapixel selfie cam, shoots in 4K 60. The image quality is very good in my opinion, especially for the price that you're paying. You get really good shots, good dynamic range, good color, and like I said, you get to take some crazy good zoom shots on this phone as well too. Now I will say that the focusing on this phone is can be a little rough, but with the software updates, it really has gotten better. But that's one thing that I noticed. But other than that, it's an excellent camera still. Now this phone has still pretty decent battery life. It's a 5000 milliamp battery with pretty respectable charging at 45 watts. You do have the wireless and the reverse wireless charging as well. And you pretty much get pretty good battery life on this phone. I was able to squeeze around 6 hours of screen on time with this phone as well too. So in general, the S20 Ultra is just an awesome buy. So be sure to let me know what you guys think, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.